My dad stood in front of 200 people, handed my brother a set of keys, and called him the future of this company. Then he looked at me, smiled, and said, "And Maya, well, every office needs someone to answer the phones." People laughed. I smiled. And I said nothing. Because I already knew something that no one in that room knew yet. My brother had just been handed an office that I owned. Beat. Let that land. My name is Maya. I'm 38. I have an MBA, a company I built from scratch. And for the last 5 years, I have been the silent reason my father's business is still alive. But to my family, I was the daughter who never quite made it. The one who left Dad's company to go do her own thing, which to them sounded like a polite way of saying I failed. My brother Jake, he stayed, he showed up. He drove the company truck and shook hands in parking lots and laughed at my father's jokes at every Sunday dinner. And so, at his own retirement party, my father looked at his 2 children and decided, without asking, without warning, without a single conversation, which one had earned the right to carry his name forward. He chose the one he could see. He never thought to look at who was actually holding the building up. But here's the thing about security systems. They record everything. And 5 years ago, on a Tuesday in March, when this company was 11 days from collapse, the security camera in that office watched exactly one person walk in and save it. It wasn't Jake. Pause. To understand why I stayed quiet for 5 years while my family thought I was the also-ran, you have to go back to the night my father called me crying. Not Jake. Not my mother. Me. The daughter who answers phones. He called me because deep down, even then, he knew. I just didn't realize he'd spend the next 5 years making sure no one else ever did. Stay with me, because the security system doesn't lie, and neither does a deed recorded at the county office. And before this video is over, you're going to watch 200 people find out exactly what that footage showed. You can't understand my family without understanding my father's company, Hartwell Business Solutions. Started in 1989 with 1 desk, 1 phone, and a Rolodex my father carried in his shirt pocket like a second wallet. He built it the way men of his generation build things, with handshakes and late nights and a stubborn refusal to ask anyone for help. By the time I was in high school, it had 60 employees, 3 floors of office space, and my father's name on the door in letters big enough to read from the parking lot. I grew up watching him work, and I respected it. I want to be clear about that, because what comes later might make you think I didn't. The problem was never that he worked hard. The problem was what he decided real work looked like. To my father, real work was visible. A sales call you could hear across the floor, a handshake that turned into a contract, a name on a truck. He measured contribution by what he could see, and what he could brag about at Sunday dinner. Jake gave him both. My brother is genuinely good with people. He can walk into a room of strangers and leave with 3 new clients and a dinner invitation. My father saw that and recognized himself. Same energy, same swagger, same instinct for the visible win. Me? I was the one in the back office running the numbers nobody wanted to look at. I caught a billing error at 24 that saved the company $340,000. My father said, "Good catch," and moved on. Jake closed a deal that same month worth $180,000 and got a standing ovation at the next team meeting. I learned early what kind of work counted in this family. So at 29, I left. Not dramatically, not in anger. I just quietly built my own firm, Hartwell Advisory. Yes, I kept the name because I'm petty in very specific ways, and I started doing for other companies what I'd always done for my father's. I fixed broken things, quietly, invisibly, for good money. My family thought I'd gone off to find myself. What I actually found was a $2.3 million revenue firm by year 4, but I never told them that. And here's where the story turns, because 2 years after I left, my father's company started dying. Not loudly, not all at once. The way good companies die when nobody's watching the numbers. Slowly, quietly, from the inside. Music tightens slightly. And my father, the man who never asked anyone for help in 50 years of business, called me, not Jake, me, at 11 p.m. on a Wednesday. Voice I'd never heard from him before. Not the Sunday dinner voice, not the boardroom voice. Something underneath all of that. Something scared. "Maya," he said, "I think I'm going to lose everything." And right there, on my kitchen floor with my laptop still open and my coffee going cold, I made a decision that would take 5 years to fully play out. A decision that ended in a retirement party, a set of keys handed to the wrong child, and a security system that remembered every single thing my family chose to forget. Beat. But before I tell you what I did that night, I need to tell you what was already on that security footage. Because that's the part my brother never knew existed, and it changes everything. Here's what nobody in my family knew about that phone call. When my father said, "I think I'm going to lose everything," he wasn't exaggerating. Hartwell Business Solutions had a $1.8 million line of credit coming due in 47 days. Their biggest client, a regional logistics company that represented 34% of total revenue, had just terminated their contract without warning. And the reserve account, the one my father called his rainy day cushion, was gone. Not stolen. Not mismanaged by someone dramatic. Just quietly drained over 18 months of bad decisions that nobody caught because the person who used to catch them had left. I drove to that office the next morning at 6 a.m. The security camera above the front entrance, the one my father installed in 2015 and never once checked the footage on dying, recorded me walking in with 2 bags, a laptop, and a yellow legal pad. It recorded me sitting at the conference room table for 11 hours straight. And it recorded the moment, at 5:17 p.m., when I found the thing that saved everything, the building. My father owned the office building outright. 3 floors, prime location, no mortgage. He'd paid it off in 2018 and considered it untouchable, not for financial reasons, but for pride reasons. That building had his name on it. He would never borrow against it. But he didn't have to borrow against it. He could sell it. To me. I structured what's called a sale-leaseback. My holding company, I called it Keystone Advisory Group, would purchase the building at full appraised value. That put immediate cash into Hartwell Business Solutions, enough to cover the credit line, enough to make payroll, enough to outlast the client loss and rebuild. In exchange, Hartwell would become a tenant, paying monthly rent to Keystone, paying rent to me. My father agreed to every term in under an hour, but then he said the thing that would define the next 5 years of my life. "Nobody can know," he said. He wasn't looking at me when he said it. He was looking at his name on the wall. Not your mother, not the staff. He paused. Not Jake. I understood him completely. A man who had spent 35 years being the one who provided, could not survive his own office, knowing that his daughter, the one who left, the phone answerer, had bought the ground he stood on. So I agreed. I signed the deed. I became the landlord of Hartwell Business Solutions. And I promised to let everyone keep believing I was the one who never quite made it. Music shifts, something with quiet tension. Now here's the part that matters. That security camera? It didn't just record me walking in that morning. It recorded everything that happened in that building for the next 5 years. Every conversation, every meeting, every time Jake took credit for a process I'd built remotely. Every time my father looked at a financial report I'd quietly restructured and told the team, "Jake's really stepping up." Every single word, stored, time-stamped, backed up to a cloud server that I, as the building owner, had full legal access to. I never planned to use it. I'm not that kind of person. But then January came. The retirement party invitation arrived on thick cream cardstock. And 2 weeks later, I found out what my brother had been planning behind everyone's back. A deal so reckless, so blindly ambitious, that it would have collapsed the company in 1 fiscal year. And he needed one signature to make it happen. Mine. Because when you own the building, certain moves the tenant makes require the landlord's written consent. And nobody had told Jake that the landlord was his little sister. Stay with me, because the retirement party is 3 weeks away, my brother is planning a coronation, and I'm sitting at my desk looking at a consent form with my own name on the dotted line, and I haven't decided yet whether to sign it. The deal my brother was pushing was called the Meridian Acquisition, a competing firm. 2 counties over, family-owned for decades, finally on the market after the founder retired. Jake had been quietly negotiating it for 6 months without telling anyone the full numbers, and the numbers were catastrophic. To close on Meridian, Hartwell would need to draw down its entire operating credit line. It would take on $2.4 million in new debt. And it would do something that nobody in that office understood, because nobody in that office read the fine print the way I do. It would breach a covenant on the existing loan. A covenant is a promise a company makes to its lender. A quiet rule buried in the loan agreement that says, as long as you owe us money, you won't let your debt exceed this ratio. Break that promise, and the lender can call the entire loan due. Immediately. All of it. At once. A company that suddenly owes $2.4 million with no operating credit left cannot pay its rent. And a tenant that cannot pay its rent has a very serious problem with its landlord. I called my father on a Tuesday afternoon, not to threaten, not to reveal anything, just to warn him the way you warn someone you still love even when they've spent years making you feel small. I told him plainly. The Meridian deal breaches the covenant. The debt ratio doesn't work. One bad quarter, one slow season, and the lender calls the loan and the whole thing collapses. He listened for about 45 seconds. Then he said the sentence I should have seen coming from a mile away. "Maya," he said, with the patience of a man who has never once been wrong in his own mind. "Leaders don't ask permission. They lead. This is Jake's vision, and I trust his vision." Then he hung up. I sat with the phone in my hand, and I felt something settle in me. Not anger, clarity. I had warned him. Privately. Respectfully. The way you protect someone's pride when you don't have to. He had told me to mind my own business. And somewhere in the next 3 weeks, my brother was going to sign a deal that would all, without anyone realizing it, hand me the one decision I had spent 5 years promising I would never have to make. That night, I went home to my husband, David. David is an architect. He spends his days figuring out which structures can carry which loads. He has never once in his life been impressed by a pretty facade. He took one look at my face and poured 2 glasses of wine without asking. "Your dad called you back?" he said. I told him about Meridian. I told him the numbers. I told him about the covenant breach and the consent clause and the fact that my brother needed my signature to close a deal that would burn everything down. David got very quiet. The way he gets quiet when he's angry on my behalf and trying not to make it about him. "Maya," he said finally, "you could end this tonight. One phone call. Tell them what you own. Watch everything change." He wasn't wrong. I had a folder. The folder had a number. The number would have stopped every renting joke, every phone answer or comment, every Sunday dinner where I passed the bread and swallowed the humiliation. I shook my head. "That's their game," I said. "Whoever owns the most wins. I'm not playing their game." "Then what are you playing?" David asked. I looked at him across the kitchen table and I said the thing I'd been slowly understanding for weeks. "I'm playing the one where I stop protecting people who never once thought to protect me." David didn't argue. He just looked at me the way he looks at a load-bearing wall someone's about to knock through, like he could see exactly what it was holding and wish someone else could finally see it too. That night, I got out the box. Gray, fireproof, lives on the top shelf of our closet. I hadn't opened it in 2 years because I hadn't needed to. Everything in it was settled. The deed to the building. Keystone Advisory Group listed as owner, recorded and stamped. The operating agreement, signed in 2 places. The lease, 7 years long, with the consent clause I'd now read 6 times that week. And tucked inside the deed, a single post-it note in my father's handwriting. 4 words. "Nobody needs to know." I read it, sitting on the bedroom floor. And for the first time in 5 years, I understood what that note actually was. It wasn't gratitude. It wasn't a secret bond between a father and his daughter. It was an instruction. Stay invisible. Protect my version of things. Don't exist in a way that makes me uncomfortable. I put the note back in the box. And I made the decision I'd been circling for 3 weeks. The party was in 4 days, and I was done being invisible. I need you to stay with me now, because what happens next starts not at the party, not at the podium, not with 200 people watching. It starts 3 days before, in a letter nobody read aloud. And it is the single most powerful thing I've ever done in my life. People think revenge is loud. They picture the dramatic speech, the gasping crowd, the moment the music swells and the wronged person finally gets to say everything they've been holding in. That's not what happened. The real move happened on a Thursday morning, 3 days before the party, in my office, with cold coffee and a legal pad and my lawyer on speakerphone. On Keystone Advisory Group letterhead, formal, dry, procedural, I formally withheld consent for the Meridian acquisition. In writing, for cause. The letter cited the covenant breach, the threat to the lease, the risk to the building's rental income stream. Every word was airtight. Every number was documented. My lawyer reviewed it twice and said the words I needed to hear. This holds up in any courtroom in the state. The letter went to Hartwell's legal counsel. It went to the credit facility agent. It went to the title company handling the Meridian closing. It was 3 pages long and written in the most boring legal language imaginable. And it killed a $2.4 million deal without a single raised voice. I didn't tell my father. I didn't tell Jake. I didn't tell my mother, who had already ordered a custom cake with "The future is bright, Hartwell and Meridian" written in gold frosting. I let them keep planning a coronation around a deal that was already quietly, legally, permanently dead. I hung my dress on the closet door that Friday night. David pressed his suit. And I put the deed, the operating agreement, and one other thing into a crisp white envelope, a USB drive, containing 5 years of security footage from the building I owned, time-stamped, labeled, organized into a single folder called "What Actually Happened." The venue was called the Grand Meridian. Yes, same name, I noticed. The kind of place people book for weddings they want photographed. 200 people, crews and their families, clients my father had worked with for decades, 2 men from the bank, my mother's entire book club. There was a projector screen behind the podium, cycling through photographs of my father's career. Jake at 28 standing next to my father, both of them grinning, hard hats tilted like trophies. Jake signing his first big contract. My father's hand on his shoulder. Jake, Jake, Jake. I found my seat at the family table and watched that screen like I was watching a film I'd already seen the ending of. My mother found me near the entrance first. She looked me over, the way she looks over a piece of furniture she suspects is secondhand. "You look lovely, Maya," she said. Then, without missing a breath, "Are you still in that apartment on the east side? I never understand why you don't just buy something. You make good money, don't you?" 200 people in the room. David standing 10 feet away with an envelope in his jacket pocket, and my mother asking me about my rent. "The landlord's very fair," I said. "Never once raised it." She patted my arm like I'd confirmed something quietly tragic and moved on. She had no idea she was talking to the landlord. Then my father took the microphone, and the room turned toward him, the way rooms always turn toward men who have spent 40 years making sure they're the most important person in it. He told the company story. They loved the company story. He talked about the handshakes and the sleepless nights, and the name on the door, and the 200 people whose families ate because of what he built, and then he got to the part everyone had come to hear. His voice dropped, went warm. The voice he uses when he wants the room to feel like they're witnessing history. "A man builds something," he said, "so he can hand it to someone who will make it greater." He looked at Jake. "My son has the vision I had at his age. He's already got a deal on the table that's going to transform everything I built." Applause. Real applause. My uncle whistling. Jake pressing a hand to his chest, like a man receiving an honor he'd been rehearsing for. My father glowing, riding the wave, completely unaware that the deal he was toasting had been legally dead for 72 hours. Killed by a letter signed by the daughter he hadn't mentioned yet. He was 4 sentences from the worst public miscalculation of his career. And he was smiling while he walked toward it. Then his eyes found me at the family table. He smiled, genuinely, like he was doing me a favor. "And Maya," he said into the microphone, as 200 faces turned to find me. "Well, every office needs someone who keeps things running behind the scenes." A little chuckle, inviting the room in. "She's always been more of a supporter than a leader, but God love her, the phones always get answered." Warm laughter. Gentle, the kind that lands softer than a slap but leaves the same mark. My mother smiled. Jake smiled into his champagne. And I felt every single face in that room touch me at once. Kind, pitying, completely certain they understood exactly who I was. I did not flush. I did not look down. I looked at my father holding his glass, and I felt the last thing I'd been carrying for 5 years go very quiet, very cold, very clear. He'd said it out loud, into a microphone, in front of everyone, and he had absolutely no idea. He just told me it was time. Music begins to build, slow, inevitable, like a tide coming in. David's hand found mine under the table. One squeeze. Our signal, and my husband, the quietest man I have ever loved, stood up. David is not a dramatic man. In 14 years of marriage, I have seen him raise his voice exactly once, at a contractor who cut corners on a load-bearing wall, because David understands better than most people that when the wrong thing holds the weight, everything above it eventually falls. So when my husband stood up at my father's retirement party, slow, unhurried, buttoning his jacket like a man with absolutely nowhere to be, the room felt it immediately, the way you feel a change in air pressure before a storm. 200 people went quiet. My father, still at the podium, glass still raised, looked over at the family table with the mild confusion of a man who just found an unscripted line in his own play. David didn't speak yet. He just stood there, letting the room settle, letting the silence do the work that words hadn't needed to do yet. My mother's smile froze. Jake's eyes narrowed. My uncle set down his drink. And into that silence, David reached into his jacket and removed the envelope. White. Crisp. Nothing written on the front. He held it at his side, relaxed, in absolutely no hurry at all. Then he looked up at my father and spoke just loud enough for the front rows and the two bankmen and the family table to hear every single word. "Gordon," he said, "before you hand anyone the keys, I have one question." The room leaned forward as one body. My father gave the tight social smile he gives people he hasn't quite figured out yet. "It's a party, David," he said, "not the time for envelopes." A few people laughed, grateful for the exit ramp. David didn't smile back, and the laughter died fast. He held the envelope open in his palm and asked the question we had built this entire night around. "Would you like to know," David said, "what this building has been saying about your family for 5 years?" The room assembled the wrong conclusion instantly. They saw the envelope. They thought money. They thought the quiet daughter had gotten rich and her husband was about to wave a number in everyone's face. My mother's hand went to her throat. Jake's chin lifted, already preparing the expression he'd make when the moment passed. My father did what my father always does when he feels cornered. He went bigger. He set his glass on the podium with a click that carried to the back wall. "Son," he said, loud now, performing patience for the room, "I know exactly what my children are worth. I raised them. One of them is about to run a company. The other one answers phones and rents an apartment on the east side." Laughter again. Thinner this time. Jake laughed. Sharp and bright and relieved, certain the moment was collapsing the way these moments always collapse when the wrong person tries to stand up at the right man's party. My mother reached across the table for my hand, ready to smooth it over, ready to fold this back into the long, comfortable story where I'm the daughter who tries her best and never quite arrives. I let her take my hand. I held my mother's hand, and I watched my father stand at that podium, dismissing David, dismissing me, dismissing the envelope, completely certain he had the measure of his own room. And I thought, with a strange, quiet tenderness, "You have no idea what you're standing on." David looked at me across the table, past my mother's hand, past 200 people waiting for this to be over. And he gave me the smallest nod. My line. I slipped my hand out of my mother's, and I stood up. 200 faces swung from David to me, the phone answerer, on her feet, at her father's retirement party. My mother whispered my name, a warning dressed as concern. I didn't sit down. I used the voice I use in the worst client meetings of my career, when the numbers are catastrophic and panic helps no one. Low, even, unhurried. "Dad," I said, "you don't have to open the envelope. I'll just tell them." Something in my tone reached him in a way the entire evening hadn't, because he had never once heard me use that voice. "Maya," he said, quieter now. "Sit down. You're making a—" "In the spring of 2020, I said over him. Not loud, just clear. The way you speak when you don't need volume because you have something better. This company was 11 days from collapse. The room went still in a completely new way. Not the curious hush from before, a real one. The two bankmen at their corner table sat forward simultaneously, because they knew. They had always known. And they had wondered for 5 years how Hartwell Business Solutions had survived when every projection said it shouldn't have. My father's face changed, the proud color draining out of it as he understood 2 sentences in exactly where this was going. The biggest client was gone. The credit line was due. There was a payroll for 60 people and nothing to cover it. I looked at the bankmen, then back at my father. "Someone saved it," I said quietly. "The way you save something when you love the people inside it more than you need the credit for fixing it. And then that someone was asked, very specifically, to make sure the family never knew it was her. My father aged 10 years in 5 seconds. I watched it happen. The truck man, the handshake man, the 40 years of visible work man, exposed in front of every person whose respect he had spent his entire life carefully earning. "Dad," I said, "you want to know what the security system saw?" I nodded to David. My husband walked to the projector, opened his laptop, and connected it to the screen behind my father's podium, the same screen that had been cycling photographs of Jake all evening. The footage was silent. Time-stamped, March 14th, 2020, 6:04 a.m. A woman walking into a dark office building alone. 2 bags, a laptop, a yellow legal pad. The same building they were all standing in right now. Me, 5 years ago. Saving everything. Not a gasp, not an uproar. Something quieter and more devastating than either of those things. The sound of 200 people realizing simultaneously that the story they had been told, the story of who mattered and who didn't, of who led and who answered phones, had been wrong. For years. And the proof had been recorded on a camera nobody thought to check. Jake had gone completely still. The bright confidence, the hand-on-chest gratitude, the easy grin, all of it gone. Replaced by the expression of a man watching the floor he's been standing on tilt beneath his feet. "That's me," I said simply, letting the timestamp speak. 5 years ago, 11 days before this company would have ceased to exist. I looked at my father. "You asked the room tonight who the leader is. You answered your own question. You just pointed at the wrong child." My father gripped the podium. And for the first time in my life, the man who had never once been publicly wrong had nothing to say. My father exploded. Of course he did, because men who have spent 40 years being the loudest voice in every room do not go quietly when the room finally hears a different voice. "That's a lie," he said into the microphone, and the speakers shrieked with it. He came out from behind the podium, red-faced, finger pointing. The same finger he pointed at contractors who cut corners and suppliers who delivered late. "You went behind my back, you bought my building. After everything I built, you make me a tenant in my own," he was shaking. "This is a betrayal, Maya. In front of everyone. How dare you?" 200 people watched my father come apart at the seams of his own retirement party. And I stood there. And I did not raise my voice 1 single inch. That was the whole thing. You understand? That was the entire victory. Not the deed, not the footage, not the consent letter sitting in 3 lawyers' inboxes. He shouted, and I stayed calm. And every second he shouted, every red-faced word into a microphone in a room full of people whose respect he had spent his life cultivating, the room understood a little more clearly which one of us was actually in control. "It's not a lie, Dad," I said, quiet, even, the client voice. "It's recorded at the county office. Anyone here can look it up Monday morning." I let him breathe. Then I said the part that mattered, the part that was already done. "And there's something else you should hear from me and not from a lawyer's letter." Jake looked up. "The Meridian deal can't close." Jake's face went white. "Closing on Meridian breaches your credit covenant. It threatens the company's ability to pay its lease. As the building owner, I have the legal right to withhold consent for transactions that put the lease at risk." I paused. 3 days ago, I exercised that right. In writing. For cause. The deal is already dead. The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the room. My father stopped shouting. He just stood there, chest heaving, staring at me. As the entire architecture of his evening, the coronation, the keys, the certainty about which child had mattered, came down beam by beam in front of the people he had most wanted to impress. Jake turned to our father the way he had turned to him his entire life. The automatic reflex of a man who had always had someone bigger to stand behind. "Dad," he said, "tell her she can't do this." My father looked at Jake. And for the first time in both our lives, he had nothing to give him. Because the authority Jake had been measuring himself against his entire career, the name on the door, the keys, the throne, was a rental, had been for 5 years. Jake looked at me then, and I'll give him this. The performance dropped completely. What was underneath it was real, raw, confused in the way people get confused when the map they've been using their whole life turns out to be wrong. "You did this to destroy me," he said. I shook my head. "No, Jake," I said. "You did this. You pushed a deal that would have collapsed everything. You rushed it so it would look like a crown. You never read the lease because reading leases is paperwork, and paperwork is what I do." I looked around the silent room, at the screen still frozen on the timestamp. 6:04 a.m., March 14th, 2020. "Dad called me a supporter tonight, not a leader." I let it land one final time. Then I turned it over for every person in that room to see the other side. He's right. I am the supporter. I have been supporting this entire company since 2020, quietly, invisibly, while everyone in this room admired the paint. I picked up the white envelope from the family table, and I set it on the podium in front of my father. The deed is in there, the operating agreement, 5 years of clean books, Everything you never wanted anyone to see. I looked at him, and I meant every word of what came next. I am not here to destroy what you built, Dad. I never was. I'm the one who saved it. But I am done saving it alone, and I am done being invisible while I do it. I straightened my jacket. Sinclair will be restructured properly. A real board. Open books. Meridian stays dead, and I have a seat at the actual table, not the one where I pass the bread and absorb the jokes. I looked at Jake one last time. You're good with people, better than I'll ever be. You can be part of this, but you don't get the keys to something you've never once bothered to understand. Then I took David's hand, and we walked out of my father's retirement party, past 200 silent people, past a screen still glowing with a timestamp that told the truth my family had spent 5 years agreeing to forget, and out into a cold, clear night where for the first time in 5 years, I wasn't carrying anything alone. The party ended early. Nobody keeps dancing after the floor shifts beneath them. For 4 days, nobody in my family called me, which was honestly just the regular amount. Then on the 5th day, my father called my cell phone. Same time of night as 2020, same number, same man, but a different voice. He didn't apologize. I didn't expect him to. He is 68 years old and built from the same material as that building on the east side. Solid and unmovable and deeply uncomfortable with vulnerability. But he didn't give orders either. There was a long pause. And then, Maya, I've got the Meridian paperwork here and I can't make sense of the covenant section. Another pause. Smaller, like it cost him something. Could you sit down with me? Look at the books. It was the first time in my life my father asked me to do the thing I actually do, instead of quietly implying it didn't count. Yes, I said, I can do that. We restructured the company the right way. Real board, open books. Meridian stayed dead and the lenders stayed satisfied, and 60 people kept their jobs through the slow quarter that came exactly when I'd warned it would. Jake runs client relations now. He's genuinely excellent at it. We are not close, but we are honest, which is more than we were. My mother stopped asking about the apartment. She asked once, carefully, like she was testing ice, "Do you and David ever think about buying a place?" "We own plenty, Mom," I said. "We just don't live in it." She let it go. That's as close to an apology as that question was ever going to get, and I took it. Music fades to quiet. Here is the only thing I want you to take from this story. Worth is not the thing other people can see. It is the beam inside the wall, the one quietly holding the entire roof up while everyone stands around outside admiring the paint. The security camera didn't lie. It never does. It just recorded what was actually there, while everyone else was busy looking at the name on the door. If you have ever been the beam, the one doing the real work while someone else gets handed the keys, stop waiting to be seen. Start counting what you are already worth. Because eventually, in a retirement party or a boardroom or a Sunday dinner that goes sideways, the timestamp tells the truth. And truth, quiet, recorded, legally documented truth, does not need a microphone. If this story hits something in you, share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Subscribe so you never miss the next one. And drop a comment below with the words, "I see her." Because I need to know I'm not telling these stories into an empty room.